Ma'am, I think you might be in the wrong room. The voice was polite but firm, carrying the barely concealed impatience of someone who had a schedule to keep. It echoed across the nearly empty dining facility, a large, sterile space with fluorescent lights, long cafeteria tables, and the faint smell of industrial cleaning solution mixed with coffee. Lieutenant Bradley, a young Marine officer with a fresh haircut and a uniform so crisp it could cut paper, stood near the entrance holding a clipboard. His eyes moved from the document in his hand to the woman standing just inside the doorway. Captain Vera Kane, 46 years old, stood perfectly still near the drink station. She wore civilian clothes, a burgundy red leather jacket over a simple black shirt and dark jeans. Her salt and pepper hair was cut short, practical. Her face showed the kind of weathering that didn't come from age alone, but from years spent under harsh suns and in situations where comfort was a luxury no one could afford. She held a tray with a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee. She had arrived early, too early apparently, and had simply gotten in line with a few other early risers on base. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet, even. Lieutenant Bradley gestured vaguely toward the far end of the dining hall, where a section had been cordoned off with portable barriers and a small sign reading, "Restricted Official Function." This facility is reserved this morning for a Marine Corps ceremonial breakfast. Only authorized personnel. He glanced at her outfit, the leather jacket, the civilian clothes, and his tone became just slightly more condescending. "The main dining facility is open. It's just across the quad." Vera looked at him for a long moment. She could have said something, could have pulled out the embossed invitation she had received 3 weeks ago, signed by the base commander himself. Could have explained that she was, in fact, one of the guests of honor. But she was tired. It had been a long drive from her small apartment 2 states over. She had barely slept. And the idea of explaining herself to a junior officer who looked barely old enough to buy a drink felt exhausting. "Understood," she said simply. She turned and walked back toward the entrance, her boots making soft sounds on the polished linoleum. Lieutenant Bradley watched her go, already turning his attention back to his clipboard, mentally checking her off as just another misplaced civilian. Behind him, a gunnery sergeant, an older man with graying hair and a chest full of ribbons, had been watching the exchange from the coffee station. His eyes had locked onto the woman the moment she entered. He had recognized her immediately. Not by her face, it had been nearly 20 years and time changed everyone, but by the way she moved, the economy of motion, the situational awareness, the way her eyes had scanned the room in that first half second, cataloging exits, threats, people, and then he had seen the patch on the left shoulder of her leather jacket. Small, faded, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. A viper coiled around a lightning bolt. His coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "Oh, hell," he whispered. Outside the dining facility, Vera stood on the steps, her tray still in hand, unsure whether to go back to her car or find the other dining hall the lieutenant had mentioned. The morning air was cool, the sun just beginning to burn off the mist that clung to the parade ground in the distance. She could hear voices inside, more personnel arriving, the clink of dishes, the scrape of chairs. The breakfast was starting. She had been invited. Her name was on the list. But the idea of going back in there, of having to prove herself, of standing in front of a room full of Marines and justifying her presence, it felt like too much. She had left that life behind. She had earned her quiet anonymity. She didn't need the ceremonies, the speeches, the medals pinned to jackets that no longer fit. She had done her job. She had come home alive, barely. And she had spent the last 15 years trying to forget the things she had done under a call sign that still made her flinch when she heard it. Iron Viper. Inside the dining facility, preparations were in full swing. Marines in their dress blue uniforms, dark navy jackets with red trim, white belts, gleaming brass buttons, stood in formation near the head table. The base commander, a stern-faced colonel with silver hair, was reviewing his notes at the podium. This breakfast was a tradition. Once a year, the base invited retired Marines, legends, heroes, men and women, who had served in the most elite units, to share a meal with the current generation, to tell their stories, to remind the young Marines why they wore the uniform. This year's guest list was particularly prestigious. 3 Medal of Honor recipients, 2 former commandants, a retired general who had led operations in 3 different wars, and one name that most of the younger Marines didn't recognize but that had sent a ripple of shock through the senior enlisted ranks when the invitations went out. Captain Vera Kane, call sign Iron Viper. The gunnery sergeant who had seen her leave was now standing near the colonel, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly. "Sir," he said urgently, "we have a problem." The colonel looked up, annoyed. "What is it, Gunny?" "Iron Viper just left." The colonel blinked. "What?" "I saw her." Lieutenant Bradley told her this was a restricted event. She walked out. For a moment, the colonel's face went completely blank. Then slowly, a look of horrified realization spread across his features. "Tell me you're joking, gunnery sergeant." "No, sir." "She's gone." The colonel's jaw tightened. He turned to Lieutenant Bradley, who was still standing near the entrance, oblivious, checking names off his list. "Lieutenant, did you just turn away a woman in a red leather jacket?" Bradley looked up, confused. "Yes, sir. She wasn't on the list. I redirected her to—" "She was on the list, you idiot!" the colonel roared, his voice echoing across the entire facility. Every Marine in the room snapped to attention. "That was Captain Vera Kane. She's one of our guests of honor." The blood drained from Bradley's face. "Sir, I didn't— She wasn't in uniform. I didn't know." "Find her," the colonel said, his voice dangerously quiet now. "Find her and bring her back. Now." Bradley practically ran out the door. Vera was halfway across the parking lot when she heard the sound of boots pounding on pavement behind her. "Ma'am! Ma'am, wait!" She turned. Lieutenant Bradley was running toward her, his face flushed, his breath coming in short gasps. He came to a stop in front of her, snapping to attention and saluting so sharply his arm made a sound. "Captain Kane, ma'am, I apologize. I made a mistake. You are absolutely on the guest list. The colonel respectfully requests, that you return inside. Please." Vera looked at him. She saw the panic in his eyes, the fear that he had just committed a career-ending mistake. She almost felt sorry for him. "It's fine, Lieutenant," she said. "I was leaving anyway." "Ma'am, please," Bradley said, and there was genuine desperation in his voice now. "The colonel will have my head. The entire event is in your honor. You're a legend. Everyone's here to meet you." Vera sighed. "I'm not a legend. I'm just someone who did a job a long time ago." "Ma'am, with respect," Bradley said, his voice steadier now. "You saved my platoon sergeant's life, Staff Sergeant Collins. He was a lance corporal in Fallujah in 2004. He said Iron Viper pulled him out of a burning Humvee under machine gun fire. He talks about you every year on the anniversary." Vera's breath caught. Collins. She remembered. A kid, barely 19, screaming, his leg trapped under a collapsed doorframe, flames licking at the vehicle's fuel tank. She had been overhead in an AH-1 Cobra gunship, providing close air support. She had seen the Humvee get hit, seen it start to burn, seen the rest of the convoy forced to retreat under heavy fire. She had landed the Cobra in the middle of the kill zone. She had run to the burning vehicle. She had pulled him out. She didn't remember it as heroism. She remembered it as necessity, as the only option that didn't involve leaving a Marine to burn alive. "He's here?" she asked quietly. "Yes, ma'am. He's inside. He's been waiting 20 years to thank you." Vera closed her eyes, took a breath, then nodded. "All right, Lieutenant. Let's go." When Vera walked back into the dining facility, the entire room stood. Every Marine, from the youngest private to the most senior officer, rose to their feet in unison, the sound of chairs scraping and boots hitting the floor echoing like thunder. The colonel stepped forward, his face grave but respectful. "Captain Kane," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "on behalf of the United States Marine Corps, I apologize for the disrespect you were shown. It was unacceptable." Vera shook her head. "It was a misunderstanding, sir. Nothing more." "It was inexcusable," the colonel corrected. He gestured toward the head table, where a chair with a small placard reading Captain V. Kane, Iron Viper, sat empty. "Please, join us." As Vera walked toward the head table, she became aware of the eyes on her. Not hostile, not judgmental, but filled with something she hadn't felt directed at her in years. Reverence. She passed a table of young Marines. Lance corporals and corporals, their dress blues immaculate, their faces young and uncertain. One of them, a woman, no more than 22, whispered as Vera passed, "That's her? That's Iron Viper?" Her companion, a male Marine with a fresh infantry insignia on his collar, nodded. "That's her. My I told us about her. She flew gunships in Fallujah, urban combat, the most dangerous flying in the Corps. They said she flew missions that should have killed her 10 times over." Vera kept walking, her face carefully neutral. But her heart was pounding. She took her seat at the head table. To her left was a retired general. To her right, an empty chair. The colonel returned to the podium. "Marines," he began, his voice solemn, "we gather here this morning to honor those who came before us, to learn from their example, to remember that the uniform we wear was paid for in blood, in sacrifice by men and women who asked for nothing in return." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "This year, we are particularly honored to have with us Captain Vera Kane. Some of you may not know that name, but every Marine who served in Iraq in the early 2000s knows her call sign." The colonel's voice grew stronger. "Iron Viper." A murmur went through the room. Some Marines leaned forward. Others exchanged glances. The colonel continued. "Captain Kane flew AH-1 Cobra attack helicopters in support of ground operations during some of the bloodiest urban combat the Marine Corps has ever seen. Fallujah, Ramadi, Najaf. She flew over 300 combat missions." He looked directly at Vera. "She was shot down twice, and both times she survived, evaded capture, and made it back to friendly lines on foot." The room was silent now, every eye on the woman in the burgundy leather jacket. But what earned her the call sign Iron Viper wasn't just her skill as a pilot, it was her refusal to leave Marines behind. The colonel gestured toward a table near the back, where a man in his late 30s, Staff Sergeant Collins, his chest covered in ribbons, was sitting, tears streaming down his face. "On November 10th, 2004, Captain Kane landed her gunship in the middle of an active firefight to pull a wounded Marine from a burning vehicle. She was not ordered to do this. She was, in fact, ordered not to. But she did it anyway." Collins stood, his voice breaking. "She saved my life, sir." The colonel nodded. "She saved 12 Marines that day, Staff Sergeant. 12 men who are alive because she decided that no Marine gets left behind meant something." He turned back to the room. "For her actions, Captain Kane was awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor. She was also awarded 2 Purple Hearts, 3 Air Medals with Combat 5, and the Distinguished Flying Cross." The colonel's voice grew quieter. "But awards don't tell the whole story. Captain Kane didn't fly for medals. She flew for the Marines on the ground. She flew so that when they called for fire support, when they were pinned down and outnumbered, they knew that Iron Viper was coming." He looked at Vera. "Captain Kane, on behalf of every Marine in this room, and every Marine who ever heard your rotors overhead and knew they were going to live another day, thank you." The room erupted in applause, not polite, ceremonial clapping, but thunderous, sustained, a sound like a physical force. Vera sat perfectly still, her face a mask of control, but her hands, folded in her lap, were trembling. After the breakfast, after the speeches and the handshakes and the photos, Vera found herself standing outside the dining facility again, the morning sun now bright and warm. Staff Sergeant Collins approached her, his steps hesitant. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I've wanted to say this for 20 years. Thank you. You didn't have to land. You could have stayed in the air. You could have lived. But you came down for me." Vera looked at him, at the man he had become, at the life she had saved. "I'm glad you made it, Collins," she said simply. "I have 3 kids now," he said, tears streaming down his face. 3 kids who exist because you didn't leave me behind. How do I ever repay that?" Vera placed a hand on his shoulder. "Live a good life. Be a good father. That's all the repayment I need." As Vera drove away from the base, the leather jacket on the passenger seat beside her, she glanced at the faded patch on the shoulder. Iron Viper. She had tried to leave that name behind, tried to bury it with the memories of fire and blood and screaming radios. But maybe, she thought, it wasn't something to be buried. Maybe it was something to carry, a reminder that she had mattered, that her life had meant something, and maybe that was enough. Stories like Vera Kane's remind us that heroes walk among us every day, often unnoticed, often in leather jackets instead of uniforms. If you believe in honoring their silent valor, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to Veterans Past Stories for more tales that deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching.